In this lesson we will talk about effectors, which will make a world of difference to your clone constellations. Before we proceed, we have to create some sort of a setup, and I think the best idea for us is to create pretty much the same setup just to fortify what we learned in the previous lesson. We will also create a arbitrary object, so let's say maybe this tube. I will scale it down roughly to, let's say, maybe this size will be okay, and I think the inner radius should be bigger, so let's multiply that by maybe 3, so yes, that's good. And we will also apply a cloner to these guys so it can generate a clone constellation. So while this guy is selected, you can, as with any generator in Scene4D, hold down the Alt key, and it will become the parent of whatever is selected here in the object manager. So now let's switch to object mode, because we want to use the spline, which is an object, to generate our clones. So we will load the circle spline here. And let's under this transform tab, and let me show you a little trick. So if you hold down your mouse button and drag over these guys, then you will activate all these tabs. Same goes if you hold down the control key, you will deselect them. Okay, so that's sometimes really handy, especially for the ones with the tablet, such as myself. And it can be really useful. So back to the transform tab, we will rotate these clones on this bank rotation. So we really don't need to use a rail spline. So type in here 90 degrees. So I really want them to be oriented like this. And this setup will pretty much help me explain some things on the first effector we will create. Now, as I mentioned before, your cloner object must be selected if you want the effector which you will create to be automatically loaded here in the effector slot. So always make sure you have an effector here, otherwise it will simply do nothing in the scene unless it affects the cloner. Now let's load our first effector while the cloner is selected, and the first effector we will explain is this plane effector. We will skip this group effector for later lessons, so select the plane effector and you will immediately see something happen in the viewport. Now I will just create a material here, because all the things in the viewport are gray, and I really want you to see what is happening with these clones, and you can apply material directly to any of these clones in the viewport, and that will automatically set the material to a cloner. Now, why do those guys jump into middle like that? So they basically shrink from the spline. And the answer lies here under parameter tab of the plane effector. Here, under position Y, we have a value of 100 centimeters. So this effector told all these clones to move 100 centimeters in Y. You can really check this out interactively. So for the ones of you that ask why those guys didn't go, let me just load the color that is more vivid, go in this direction, since this is Y, the answer is located in this transform mode and transform space. So let's get rid of this little guy and get back to our parameter tab of the plane effector. So this currently says that the transform mode will be relative to a node, and in this case the node is this little guy here. So if I disable a cloner just for a moment, you'll actually see that Y is pointing in this direction, but once they are cloned on the spline, you'll actually see that that Y is pointing like this inwards. So Y plus, Y minus in this direction. So I hope that makes sense. Of course, you can change the transform space to anything you like. So you can use the effector, and now those guys will go upwards 100 centimeters in Y, because the effector, since we are using its transform space, has its Y-axis pointing upwards. Okay, I hope this is clear enough. So basically you can use even a absolute scale, which is pretty much self-explanatory, or you can use even a remap node. So basically you have a combination of transform mode and the space that it will use for transforming the clones. So I really suggest using this relative to node mode, because it will give you most predictable results. So I'll set this to 0, and if I'm not mistaken, this X will bring my clones upwards like this. So let's put here 100 as a nice round number. Now let's add some life to this guy by enabling this rate option, so these guys will begin to spin. So let's hit play here and set something like maybe 10. That will be good enough, and let's use even 20 clones. Maybe it will be a little bit more interesting. In the plane effector, you can now play with other parameters like scale. So for example, you can scale the clone on one axis. You can scale them uniformly. I'll stop this just for a second, because it kind of slows things down while I'm recording. And once this uniform scale is enabled, you can simply scale the clones to a value of 1, which will mean double the size, or even further. So 1 would mean 100% here, so that would effectively mean you can use -1 and completely hide those guys, simply because their size will be cut down by 100%. Okay? Hope this is understandable enough. There is also an absolute scale, which will help prevent some scaling problems in certain constellations, but maybe we'll talk about this later. Let me disable this scale for now. Rotation. Rotation means that you can affect also the clone's rotation, so you can pretty much do anything you like with them. So now let's just clarify this transform mode and transform space. So now let's say that I'll use the effector space, and you can see it's rotating around the effector space. I hope this makes sense, and I really strongly suggest that you use this relative node mode for the starters until you have really a decent grasp of MoGraph. Now, many of you would say, well, this is nothing really spectacular or something you couldn't do with the cloner itself, but here is one of the reasons why the effectors are so powerful. So we'll take a look here under this fall off tab. And this fall off is really designed to limit the effect of the effector in a certain space. So it's really some sort of a confining tool. It will confine the effect in a certain shape. So you have a bunch of shapes here, ranging from various primitives like capsule or cone or sphere, to really interesting ones like linear and source. I will explain linear later, and just mention that this source can use a spline, can use a particle, or it can use a polygon object as a shape of a fall-off. So this fall-off functionality is really important in Effectors. So let me load up a simple sphere, and you will notice we have a new gizmo in the viewport, and also that our clones assumed their initial position regardless of the setting here. So we told them that we want them to move 100 centimeters in X, but they're still at their initial positions. Why? The answer to that is really simple. Now the falloff is actually this gizmo here, so everything inside it will be affected and everything outside will not. So let's physically move it here and you will notice something happening. Now these guys moved according to this value because they are in the reach of the falloff. You can see you have a yellow and a red sphere representation in the viewport, and that is actually this falloff. There is a bunch of settings here which are related to that falloff, and the most important are the scale. So you can scale this guy in 1, 2 or all axes. You can offset it, you can even create a slicing function, so it really helps a lot. And this falloff, as I was saying, is could actually be considered as a smoothing value. So if the falloff is set to 100%, then transition from here to the edge of this falloff will be really smooth. So let's hit play and demonstrate it. Look how those clones really follow and are reaching the 100 centimeter value, which is set here, really smoothly. So if this would be at 0, then reaching that value we set under parameter tab will be really abrupt like that. So here under falloff function, you can actually set something different than a spline, because now you can map that behavior with a spline. So let me show you that. I will load I'm not sure you can see that because it is cut off. I will load here a spline preset, so I will load a sine wave spline. And if I hit play and increase this falloff, these guys will now obey the movement of this spline here. So that is really cool. You have a bunch of options here. So the falloff can be linear, inverse, inverse squared, or even in a step manner. So step means 1 by 1 basically, so falloff will really not do what it does in this spline mode. Let me reset that spline. And that is really great. One thing that I should mention, you have this invert guy, which will basically invert the effect to everywhere outside this guy. So let's invert it, and you will see that now all these guys outside are actually receiving this 100 centimeters value, and those are really not receiving it, and they're not receiving it gradually. So let's increase this back to 100. And I believe now it is a good time for me to explain this sort mode, which we skipped on our initial introduction of the cloner. So let's actually get rid of this plane effector, and we will create a new one, and we'll create a few more objects. So let's say a pyramid, and I'll scale that guy also down to say 20% of original size, and let's go with one more. Let's create maybe, let's go with the cube, and I will scale that guy also. So now we have 3 objects under the cloner, but only the first one is shown. So to effectively use this sort mode, you have to load the effector for it. So our cloner is selected, and we will once again load a plane effector, and let's set exactly the same value so we don't complicate things unnecessarily. And if you hit play, you can see that the cloner is still working as expected, and the clones are revolving just as in previous setup. So let's go back. Once the clones are in the sort mode, the plane effectors modify clone value will actually pick which clone is displayed. So if you progressively play with this guy, you will see that it picks based on the percentage. So it splits this to 100%. So you can have like a zillion objects here, but they will be all mapped to 100%. So this modify clone picks which clone is actually active and visible. Now you can imagine that if you create a fall-off for this guy, let's use the same one and move this guy here. You can imagine that things can become quite interesting when you use this modify clone and fall-off. So let's set this to 100% and press play. So you will see that this object is actually changing, and I'm really showing you the bits and pieces of how MoGraph works, and maybe this is a little bit boring, but it's really important for you to understand this. So if you play with this fall-off guy, you will get all cubes. So you're basically creating a transition here. So you'll see it briefly becomes a pyramid also. So this is absolutely great. And I couldn't have think of a most simplest way to explain this modify clone. And this is not the end of the line. Actually, it is just the beginning. So here is a visibility checkbox. So if you check this, press play, you would probably expect something regarding clone visibility to happen, and it will, but on this plane effector, for this effect to be seen, you have to put this maximum value. As you can see, you can pretty much define the maximum and minimum points for all these parameters with the single sliders. This guy has to be 0. And for the maximum effect, you want this guy to be 100. So it is a little bit illogical and may at first glance be a little bit non-intuitive, but once you understand MoGraph, this will become really clear and apparent to you. Also, it is worth noticing that this rule doesn't apply to all other effectors. In fact, I believe it only applies to a plane effector. So now you can see our clones are actually disappearing. So you can create very interesting effects. Here under fall-off, if you change this, nothing will happen because you really cannot map the amount of visibility. It is either visible or invisible. Okay? And just to confirm something, if we hit this invert guy, all the other guys which are outside this volume that is defined by the shape of the fall-off will be invisible. So let's uncheck that and continue with explaining these parameters here. I deliberately skipped this color mode because I will use two effectors for this and we'll explain this a little bit more in depth because there are so many misconceptions about texturing MoGraph clones, and I think this deserves a better clarification. Now I want to explain this weight transform because it's a little bit difficult to understand, and if you have experience with weight painting, then this is actually a weight option for the clone. So you can give a clone its specific weight. So first, here under Effector tab, I will reset these guys because things won't work as expected with this weight transform parameter if those settings stay the same, and I will uncheck this visibility and completely set this back to 0%. Now you can see how MoGraph is big and complex and intertwined system, but I'll really try and give my best to explain some of these settings here. So weight transform. If you want to see the specific amount of weighting for the clone, you have to enable that under cloner. So here under transform tab, under display, I will choose weight, and you will get this little dot inside each and every clone. Now to give a weighting value to a clone, you have to turn off every single parameter here. So position, scale, and rotation has to be turned off. Also, this weight transform has to be set to 100%. Now, if I scale this just a bit, you will see that some of these guys becoming a bit more orangey. They're really going towards yellow. So this fall off will control how soft that transition is. So I will scale the fall off down completely so you can see the effect really abruptly. Now, if I press play, nothing will happen. I just gave my clones a weight value, and this yellow means 0% of weight, and red means 100% of weight. So to see this in action, you can actually create another plane effector, and I will use completely the same values as we did for the first one, and will now press play to see the effect. Now, basically what I want to do is I want this guy, which is only weighting the clones, it's only giving them weight values. I want this guy to be used as a transform value for this plane effector. I really know this sounds complicated, so here under fall off, if I turn this weight down, that is for our effector that is actually controlling the height, if I tune this down, you will see something happening. So now, if the weight is 0, it will use the weight transform of these guys. So I really hope this makes sense. So you can really morph things and create really interesting and advanced effects. You can mix the motion and stuff like that. So consider it as a weight painting for clones. And this kind of setups are used when you want one effector to affect many others. So let's say you created a bunch of other effectors, created the desired look, and gave all the clones their weighting values, and then you can trigger all that with a single effector. I hope I haven't lost anyone so far, so let's continue. And there is one more thing I want to show you before we proceed to a lesson about coloring clones. And there is this time offset value, so I can actually get rid of this guy, and I will turn off the visibility of weight. So I will set this to none, so it really doesn't confuse us unnecessarily. Now, let's get rid of these excessive objects, and really want to keep it clean so you're able to understand more easily. Now, this parameter found here will actually work if you have some sort of a keyframed animation, and you can currently see that our plane effector is not moving these guys simply because this weight is set to 0. So let's get back this to 100% and ensure everything will happen correctly. So I will disable the cloner and create a really simple animation. So let's maybe go with the position wise. So I will keyframe this at the frame 0. So I'm control clicking this little guy, so it will keyframe only this parameter. We'll go to frame 60, repeat this, and on the frame 30 I will use maybe, let's say 100, which is the value we are used to use. So 100, and we will basically get up and down motion for our guy. So that is working as expected. And one would expect that if you enable this cloner, that these guys will obey this animation, and they will, but only once you disable this fix clone. So you can see the effect now. And this is a really good opportunity to show you how this smooth rotation guy really solves this jittering problem. So if you enable it, you'll really have smooth transitions. I will maybe set this to even, so we have even distribution of clones on this spline. So back to our time offset, and it's really simple. Let's say that you created a setup that you really like and you're really happy with it. And if you want to offset it, so for example, if you want this to start at the frame 30, you will enter 30 here. So that's really not technically correct, but I really don't want to trouble you with all those technical details. So if you press play now, nothing will happen until frame 30. Of course, you can use any other value. So, for example, if you set this to 107, nothing will happen at all since our complete time is 90 frames. You can even go in negative directions, so things will happen earlier. So it will basically shift all keyframes for a given object for this amount here. Hope this makes sense and that is really understandable. Now we will talk in our next lesson about this color mode and different ways how to color clones. What I want you to know is to understand that although MoGraph is really complex and it all works in conjunction, that almost all effectors have a really similar parameters. So if you can understand this concept shown here in this lesson, and especially in the next regarding coloring clones and giving them various materials and color values, you'll be able to understand the principle that lies in every single of these generator guys and this effector. So this was really a basic fundamental premise of how MoGraph operates. Really take your time and explore the cloner and the plane effector, which is pretty much the most simplest effector and one that is easiest to understand. Okay, so let's now go to our next lesson where we will cover some options of how to color your clones.